In the heart of Siberia, far from the reach of civilization, lies Lake Baikal, a vast and ancient abyss carved deep into the bones of the earth. Its waters, so dark and cold they seem to breathe, stretch down over 1,600 meters into a blackness that no sunlight can penetrate. Shrouded in mist for much of the year, Baikal's surface ripples with an eerie stillness, as if the lake itself is holding its breath. The wind that howls over the surrounding mountains carries a strange weight, a whisper of forgotten things buried in the lake's impossible depths. Legends say Baikal is more than just a lake. It's a relic of the Earth's ancient past, a place older than memory. The locals speak in hushed tones of strange occurrences, boats that disappear without a trace, fishermen who return with haunted eyes, and lights that flicker beneath the surface at night. The lake's clear waters may seem inviting, but beneath lies something colder and older, an ominous presence that stirs in the silence, unseen but always there. The creatures that thrive in its depths are twisted echoes of life from another time, their strange forms preserved in the lake's frigid grip. The deeper you go, the more the lake reveals its secrets best left undisturbed. There is a sense that Baikal watches all who approach, waiting, as if its waters are a portal to something far darker than the world above. The cold is more than physical here. It seeps into your bones, leaving a lingering dread that gnaws at the edges of the mind. What lurks beneath the surface, in the lake's ancient abyss, remains a mystery. But those who have peered too deeply into Baikal's depths often return with stories of something watching them, something that doesn't belong to our world. By the early 1980s, the Soviet Union stood at the height of its power, yet it was an empire cloaked in paranoia. The Cold War had transformed the vast nation into a fortress of secrecy and control, with every scientific discovery and military advance shrouded in layers of classified reports. The Soviet government, ever watchful for threats both foreign and domestic, had long turned its eyes toward the depths of its most remote and untouched regions. Lake Baikal, the deepest and most ancient freshwater lake on Earth, had become a quiet fascination for the Soviet military. Its isolated location, coupled with the rumors of strange activity beneath its waters, sparked interest at the highest levels. Some whispered of strategic advantages. If there were secrets hidden within Baikal, the Soviet Union wanted them before anyone else could claim them. In the upper echelons of the military, even the most outlandish reports were given attention. The unknown was never dismissed, not when it could be exploited. Fishermen's tales of ghostly lights and strange disappearances in the lake's depths were not unusual, but something changed when a series of strange, unidentified signals were detected during routine naval surveillance. Unexplained sonar readings indicated massive moving objects deep within the lake, far too large to be mere fish or underwater debris. These anomalies piqued the interest of military scientists, who speculated that the lake's abyssal depths could hide a previously unknown natural or unnatural phenomenon. The Soviet leadership, already burdened by the political pressures of the Cold War, quietly sanctioned a top-secret mission to investigate the lake. They feared that these unknown forces could represent a threat or, worse, an untapped resource that could shift the balance of global power. The mission was carefully crafted, with military precision, disguised as a routine training exercise to avoid public attention. For the men chosen to lead the operation, secrecy was paramount. To be selected was an honor, though one fraught with danger. The divers selected for the mission were sworn to silence before they even knew what they were being sent to find. Classified orders, encrypted communications, and covert operations were the lifeblood of the Soviet military machine, and this mission was no exception. The truth of what lay beneath Baikal was not to be known outside the Kremlin's inner circle. Failure was not an option. The men involved knew too well the fate that awaited those who couldn't complete a mission for the motherland. It was in this shadowed climate of suspicion and ambition that Captain Alexei Volkov and his team found themselves on the precipice of a mystery far beyond anything they had prepared for. What they would soon encounter in the abyss of Lake Baikal would forever change them, and though they didn't know it yet, one of them would be changed forever. In the summer of 1982, Captain Alexei Volkov and his team of 12 elite Soviet Navy divers were dispatched to Lake Baikal under the strictest secrecy. Officially, it was a routine training exercise, but the men knew better. Their orders were clear: investigate the strange sonar readings detected in the lake's depths and report only to their superiors. No questions were asked and none were encouraged. The lake, vast and unnervingly still, held an atmosphere thick with unease as the men prepared for their dive. Lake Baikal was known for its depth and cold, but rumors about strange occurrences beneath its waters were whispered among locals. Volkov's team, however, was highly trained, and they descended into the abyss with a sense of resolve, unaware of the terror waiting below. As they descended, the water grew colder and darker with each meter. At 150 meters, their sonar readings became erratic. Strange pulses echoed from the depths, growing stronger as they neared 200 meters. It was then that they saw them, humanoid figures, enormous and pale, swimming with impossible grace. Their skin shimmered in the dim light of the divers' lamps, their eyes deep and black, locking onto the intruders with unsettling intelligence. The Baikal Swimmers. For a moment, the creatures seemed to observe them in silence, but the tension shattered when one of the swimmers lunged at Sergei Antonov, a young diver on Volkov's team. Too fast to stop, the creature wrapped its long fingers around Antonov and dragged him deeper into the abyss. The remaining divers were thrown into chaos as they attempted to save Antonov, but the swimmers responded with terrifying force, knocking the men back and sending their equipment into disarray. Lights flickered, oxygen levels dropped, and the cold seemed to close in around them. Captain Volkov, struggling to regain control, ordered an immediate ascent. In the frantic scramble to the surface, the divers were pushed to their limits. Some equipment failed, and others suffered from the rapid change in pressure. As they broke through the surface, gasping for air, they realized the full scope of their loss. Sergei Antonov was gone, taken by the swimmers into the dark. Though they had surfaced, several of the divers succumbed to decompression sickness due to their rapid ascent. Medics were summoned, but the damage was done. Volkov's anger simmered beneath the surface as he watched his men fall one by one, their bodies unable to handle the strain. Antonov was the only diver missing, but the lake had claimed them all in one way or another. The mission was immediately classified, but Volkov's fury could not be contained. He had lost one of his own, and he was not about to let the lake keep him. The swimmers, whatever they were, had taken Antonov, but they had made a mistake. They had left survivors, and Volkov intended to go back. It wasn't just the military calling for another dive. It was personal. He needed answers. He needed to know what those creatures wanted. And more than anything, he needed to bring Antonov back. Dead or alive, they wouldn't abandon him. Among the survivors, opinions were divided. Some, still shaken by what they had seen, refused to even consider returning to the lake. But a few, those who had escaped without serious injury, shared Volkov's resolve. They clung to the hope that Antonov was alive somewhere, held captive by the swimmers for reasons they couldn't understand. To them, the next mission wasn't just another dive, it was a rescue. They would face the lake again, not out of duty, but out of loyalty to their fallen comrade. The Soviet military, unable to ignore the disappearance of one of its own, began planning another dive with even greater urgency. Only weeks separated them from their next descent, but this time, Volkov and his men wouldn't just be searching for strange signals. They would be hunting for answers. Answers buried deep in the cold, black waters of Lake Baikal. Volkov's fury would not be easily contained, and the swimmers would soon learn that they hadn't broken him. Not yet. The new dive team, assembled under Captain Alexei Volkov's watchful eye, was a blend of survivors from the first mission and fresh recruits. Among the 12 divers, 3 were veterans of the harrowing initial encounter, their haunted eyes carrying the weight of unspeakable memories. The newcomers included specialists meticulously selected by the Soviet military, a marine biologist versed in abyssal ecosystems, an engineer skilled in deep-sea technology, and a psychologist tasked with monitoring the crew's fragile mental state. Each diver bore a solemn resolve, but unease lingered in the air like a palpable fog, thickened by the knowledge of what lay beneath the icy waters. This mission would probe an area dubbed the Devil's Cauldron, a section of the lake notorious for strange phenomena. Located near a submerged ridge, the site was marked by mysterious sonar echoes, indicating the presence of massive underwater caves. Local legends spoke of inexplicable lights emanating from the depths and stories of fishermen who returned to shore only to abandon their trade entirely, whispering of things that watched from the water. For Volkov, the choice of the site wasn't just strategic, it was personal. He believed it held the key to Sergei Antonov's fate, and perhaps the motives of the creatures they now called the Swimmers. The divers were outfitted with upgraded pressurized suits, lined with thermal insulation to withstand the lake's bone-chilling temperatures, and reinforced with Kevlar-like materials to protect against unknown threats. Their helmets featured enhanced communication systems, and their oxygen supplies were calibrated for extended durations, allowing for a longer exploration window. The vessel above was armed with emergency recovery winches and a sonar array tuned to track every movement below. Even their weapons, modified harpoon guns, were a grim reminder of the potential hostility they might face. As the team prepared to enter the water, the lake's surface stretched out like a vast black mirror, reflecting the ominous clouds above. The calm belied the perilous world below, where visibility faded into impenetrable darkness and unknown forces waited in the silence. With a last grim glance at his team, Volkov gave the signal, and one by one, they disappeared beneath the surface, plunging into the abyss. The second dive began with an unsettling stillness. As the team descended into Lake Baikal's frigid depths, the inky blackness of the water swallowed them. The divers' LED helmet lights created beams of white against the infinite void, illuminating only the narrow patches of their descent path. Surrounding them was an alien world of shifting shadows and faint glimmers of life. Small, translucent fish, their bodies glowing faintly, darted in and out of view, seeming to vanish as quickly as they appeared. The deeper they went, the more surreal the landscape became. Vast underwater rock formations loomed out of the darkness, like forgotten monoliths, their surfaces carved with grooves that resembled claw marks or ancient inscriptions. The Devil's Cauldron lived up to its name. The water here seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, and faint, almost imperceptible sounds, like a deep hum or a distant wail, vibrated through the divers' suits. At 300 meters, one of the divers released a flare. The brilliant burst of orange light revealed a cavernous trench below them, its walls jagged and forbidding. The trench extended as far as the eye could see in both directions. A yawning chasm in the lake bed. Strange, string-like forms swayed gently in the currents, plant-like but impossibly large, their luminescent tendrils glowing faintly. These weren't simple sponges or algae. They looked alive, almost sentient, as if they were watching the intruders. The walls of the trench seemed unnatural, almost sculpted. They bore intricate patterns that defied explanation, swirling symbols and geometric lines that resembled the crude beginnings of a forgotten script. The marine biologist, transfixed by the markings, muttered through the comms, This looks intentional, not natural erosion." The observation only deepened the tension among the team. As they drifted deeper into the trench, the water grew colder, their suits struggling to keep up with the temperature drop. A faint bluish glow began to emanate from below, dim but steady, as if inviting them further into the abyss. The glow was coming from somewhere within the trench itself, pulsating rhythmically, almost like a heartbeat. Volkov's voice came through the comms, steady but edged with urgency. Keep moving. Stay close to your partner. This trench is massive." His words carried the weight of determination, but even he couldn't hide the unease creeping into his voice. The divers obeyed, their lights casting eerie shadows against the trench walls. The trench seemed alive, its depths holding secrets far older than the lake itself. As the divers ventured further, faint structures began to take shape in the bluish glow, arches and spires jutting from the lake bed, half buried under centuries of sediment. It was as if they were nearing the ruins of an underwater civilization, hidden in the heart of the Devil's Cauldron. Volkov signaled a stop, and the team hovered in eerie silence, the faint glow illuminating the skeletal outline of the ancient structures. No one spoke, but they all felt the same overwhelming sensation. They were being watched. The bluish glow pulsing from the trench illuminated more than just the ruins. It seemed to cast light on the divers themselves, as though exposing them to unseen eyes. The structures below grew clearer with every meter of descent, arches carved with intricate patterns, towering columns leaning at odd angles, and what appeared to be pathways winding through the sediment-covered floor. It was unmistakable now. These were no natural formations. This was the remnant of something ancient, something built. Volkov held up a clenched fist, signaling the team to stop. His breath echoed in his helmet as he surveyed the scene. The ruins, massive and alien in their design, sprawled across the trench floor like a city long abandoned. "Spread out," his voice crackled through the comms. "But stay within sight of your partner. We document everything." The divers moved cautiously, their LED lights sweeping across the strange architecture. One of them, the marine biologist, pointed toward an ornate pillar etched with a swirling pattern that seemed to ripple under the light. "This is like nothing I've ever seen. It's too precise for erosion. It's..." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. The others felt it too, a profound wrongness, as though the ruins were not meant to be seen by human eyes. As they advanced deeper into the ruins, the faint glow intensified. The source of the light was unclear, but it seemed to emanate from the very stones of the structures. It was then that one of the divers, a young recruit, froze mid-step. "Captain," he whispered, his voice trembling, "I think we're not alone." All eyes turned toward him, and then they saw it too. Just beyond the edge of their lights, faint shapes moved through the water, large, slow, deliberate. The Baikal Swimmers. They were back. The creatures hung in the water, their silvery skin shimmering in the glow from the ruins. Their elongated limbs moved with eerie precision, their black, expressionless eyes fixed on the intruders. They made no move to attack, but their presence was suffocating, a silent warning that froze the divers in place. Volkov's voice broke the silence. "Hold your ground. Don't engage. Observe." His tone was calm, commanding, but even he couldn't hide the undercurrent of tension. The swimmers did not move closer. They watched, their stillness more unnerving than aggression. The team continued forward cautiously, their movements deliberate and slow. One diver, unable to shake the feeling of being herded, muttered, "They're watching us, guiding us maybe." No one responded, but the thought lingered in the air, unspoken but heavy. They reached the center of the ruins, where the glow was brightest. Here, the structures were larger, more elaborate, their carvings depicting forms that seemed almost humanoid, but grotesquely distorted. A large archway, partially collapsed but still imposing, loomed ahead. The biologist examined the symbols on its surface, his voice quivering as he spoke. This isn't just a ruin. This was a gateway, or a temple, something they worshipped or protected." As if summoned by his words, the swimmers began to move. Slowly, deliberately, they advanced, their forms gliding through the water with unnerving grace. The divers instinctively clustered together, their harpoon guns raised but trembling. Volkov held up a hand, signaling them to hold fire. "Wait," he commanded. "They're not attacking." The swimmers stopped just beyond the archway, their dark eyes fixed on the humans. It was then that one of them, larger than the rest, moved closer. The water around it seemed to grow colder, and the faint vibrations that had followed the divers from the surface now resonated louder, as if emanating from the creature itself. The team stood frozen as the swimmer extended an impossibly long arm toward the archway, its fingers brushing the symbols carved into the stone. The glow from the ruins pulsed brighter for a moment, as though responding to the creature's touch. The swimmer then turned its gaze back to the divers, a silent communication passing between them, a warning or perhaps an invitation. Volkov's grip tightened on his harpoon gun. "No sudden moves," he murmured. "We're deep in their territory now." The glow from the archway pulsed steadily, casting long shadows across the ruins. The swimmers, silent and motionless, hovered just beyond the structure, their black eyes fixed on the divers. Volkov's team stood frozen, weapons gripped tightly but unused. The oppressive stillness of the water weighed heavily on them, as though the lake itself was pressing down. Then, the vibrations shifted. A new rhythm emerged, faint and pulsing, as if the ruins themselves were responding to an unseen signal. The swimmers turned in unison, their attention drawn to the far side of the ruins. The divers followed their gaze, their lights cutting through the darkness, until a figure emerged from the shadows. It moved slowly, awkwardly, its limbs stiff and deliberate. The helmet and suit were unmistakable. Volkov's breath hitched as he recognized the markings. "Antonov," he said, his voice barely a whisper. The figure drifted closer, illuminated by the ruins' eerie glow. His visor was cracked, revealing a face pale and slack, his expression devoid of emotion. It was Sergei Antonov, but the man they knew seemed absent. His movements, though more fluid than before, carried an unnatural detachment, as though he were a puppet being guided by unseen strings. "Sergei!" Volkov called out. "It's Volkov. Do you hear me?" Antonov stopped, his head tilting slightly, as if considering the question. His comms crackled, and his voice, flat and devoid of warmth, came through. "You shouldn't be here." Volkov took a step forward, ignoring the faint protests of his team. "We came for you. We're taking you back." Antonov's gaze shifted to the swimmers, who loomed silently behind him. "They let me go," he said coldly. "But you don't belong here. None of you do." One of the swimmers drifted closer, its elongated arm brushing against the archway. The symbols carved into the stone flared briefly, casting the ruins in a ghostly light. Volkov could see now that the archway was part of a larger structure, half buried in the sediment, a vast complex stretching into the darkness. Faint outlines of other buildings, towers, and pathways hinted at a forgotten civilization, swallowed by the lake and left to decay in silence. Volkov's voice tightened. "What did they do to you, Sergei? What are they?" Antonov turned his hollow gaze toward him, his expression unreadable. "They are the beginning," he said cryptically, "and the end. They keep this place. They protect it." The swimmers began to move, circling the divers slowly, their dark eyes unblinking. Volkov raised a hand, signaling his team to hold their ground. The creature's movements were deliberate, but not aggressive, more like a predator studying its prey, or a judge weighing its verdict. Antonov's voice broke through the tense silence. "They've shown me things you can't understand. You were never supposed to see this." His tone carried no fear, only a chilling certainty. "If you stay, they will make you see, and you won't survive it." Volkov scanned the ruins again, his mind racing. The structures, the swimmers, even Antonov, they were all connected. This place, whatever it was, had a purpose far beyond human comprehension, and they were trespassers. The larger swimmer paused in front of Volkov, its black eyes locking with his. It raised one long arm, pointing upward. The gesture was clear. Leave. Volkov hesitated, his grip tightening on his harpoon gun. Every instinct told him to fight, to push forward, but the weight of Antonov's words held him back. He turned to his team, his voice firm. "We're leaving. Now!" Antonov drifted toward the divers, his movement still unnervingly calm. "They've let me go," he said again, his voice as cold as the water around them. "But they won't let you come back." The swimmers withdrew, retreating to the edges of the ruins as the divers began their ascent. Volkov glanced back one last time, taking in the haunting glow of the archway and the silent watchers. The sense of being observed never left them, even as the ruins faded into darkness below. Antonov moved with the team, his presence unnerving but unchallenged. Volkov couldn't shake the feeling that the man beside him was no longer the same Sergei Antonov who had disappeared 2 weeks earlier. Whatever the swimmers had shown him, whatever they had done, had left a mark that would never fade. The icy waters of Lake Baikal parted as the divers broke the surface, their breaths ragged and sharp through their comms. The research vessel loomed ahead, its lights piercing the fog that had settled over the lake. The world above felt alien after the oppressive weight of the abyss, but the tension refused to lift. The divers hauled themselves onto the deck one by one, their movements mechanical, their faces pale. Volkov emerged last, his helmet clutched in one hand. His lungs burned from the cold air, but it wasn't relief he felt. It was dread. He looked at Antonov, who stood apart from the others, water streaming from his damaged suit. His eyes were fixed on the horizon, unblinking, distant. There was no joy in his return, only silence. The crew scrambled to assist the divers, but Volkov waved them off, his mind racing with the images burned into his memory. The glowing ruins, the swimmers' black, unyielding eyes, the carvings on the walls that seemed to tell a story humanity was never meant to know. He turned to Antonov, his old friend, now a stranger. "Sergei," he said, his voice low but firm. "What did they do to you?" Antonov didn't answer. His gaze never left the lake, his expression unreadable. When Volkov stepped closer, he finally spoke, his tone devoid of emotion. "They showed me what's beneath us, what's always been beneath us." He turned to meet Volkov's eyes, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. "You shouldn't have come back. Nobody should have." Volkov felt a chill that had nothing to do with the lake. "What are they?" he asked, almost pleading. "What do they want?" Antonov shook his head, the faintest flicker of something, pity, crossing his face. "They don't want. They are, and they'll wait. They've always waited." The words hung in the air like a death knell. Volkov opened his mouth to respond, but Antonov turned away, walking toward the edge of the deck. The others gave him a wide berth, their unease palpable. Volkov wanted to press him, to demand answers, but the weight of the dive, of everything he'd seen, crushed the words before they could form. The crew began stripping down the equipment, their movements hurried, their eyes avoiding the water. Volkov stood at the railing, staring at the endless expanse of the lake. The fog seemed thicker now, curling around the vessel like a shroud. For a moment, he thought he saw faint lights flickering beneath the surface, but when he blinked, they were gone. Antonov remained at the edge of the deck, staring into the mist. Volkov approached cautiously, his voice soft. "We'll figure this out, Sergei." Antonov didn't respond immediately. When he finally did, his voice was barely audible. "You can't figure out what was never meant to be understood." Volkov swallowed hard, his mind returning to the haunting glow of the ruins and the swimmer's silent warning. He wanted to argue, to push back against the fear creeping into his soul. But he couldn't. The silence of the lake was too loud, too heavy with the secrets it kept. As night fell, the vessel began its slow journey back to port. The divers sat in uneasy silence, their faces etched with exhaustion and something deeper, an understanding they could never share. Volkov remained by the railing, staring into the abyss of the lake as the fog swallowed it whole. Antonov stayed motionless, a shadow among the crew, his eyes fixed on the dark waters. Volkov cast one last glance at his friend, at the man who had returned but was no longer truly there. The lake had taken something from him, something no one could ever give back. And in the quiet of the night, as the lake disappeared behind them, Volkov realized the truth that would haunt him forever. The Baikal swimmers had let them go, not out of mercy, but because they knew. This wasn't over.